Live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another IRMAC webinar. We're the Information Resource Management Association of Canada, and we're located physically in the Toronto area. I'm Deborah Henderson, your host as usual, the past president of IRMAC currently. And I'd like to bring your attention to our new website, which is scrolling its banner right now on your screen. And we'd like to invite you to, search through our website and see what we're all about and what's new and what we're thinking about. We have our events listed, as well as who we are and our current board and how to get in touch with any of us. If you're a member, you can log on or create a new account and look at specific resources. And you can even look to speak at one of our sessions. We're all about data and information. And so if you have some real life stories to attend, to talk about, or you'd like to share your knowledge, please get in touch with one of us. So today's event is listed on our events page, as well as through our communication channels, including LinkedIn. You don't have to be a member of IRMAC in order to be a member of our LinkedIn group. So we post all kinds of news and new books and articles, white papers, and so forth on our LinkedIn group. So please think about joining that. All our past sessions are listed on the events page, including the links to YouTube. You're watching this on YouTube now, so welcome on that side. And so please, during this session, put your comments and questions into the YouTube comments area, and they'll be relayed into our session live. So this session is a rebook of our session from 2 weeks ago, where we had technical difficulties. We're going to talk about getting your data management unstuck, key insights on digital transformations. So if you click through here, you can see the details of what we're going to be talking about today, and you can reference this as we into the future. So our speaker today is Barb Forth, who has over 30 years of data management experience. She works and lives in California. So welcome today. She's accomplished information management leader who has delivered a wide range of IT solutions with a focus on business intelligence and analytics, business and data architecture, database technology research, and large-scale operations management. She's the founder of Forth Consulting, and we'll be putting her links in the comments below, so you can get in touch with her after the session. And she helps in banking, finance, and healthcare with data strategy, management, and delivery. She's led information architecture and data governance functions at Capital Group, probably the largest equity company in the world, after joining the CG Enterprise Architecture Leadership Team in 2012 in the role of Principal Information Architect. Her focus was on data management and quality, and from this role she launched and chaired a federated CG Data Governance Council. Before CG, she worked in financial services industry, including Fidelity Investments in Boston. So welcome, Barb. She's going to be talking today about getting your data management unstuck. And according to recent MIT research, only 14% of companies have an operational backbone that includes data management. And so this is part of the being stuck. So Barb, welcome. And I'll now turn it over to her.
Why, thank you. Let me do my, screen share. Hang on one second. Can you see my screen at this point?
Not yet.
Here's the screen share. How's that?
Beautiful.
Now I have to go back to this. Excellent. Okay, so Deborah, you can see the screen fine?
Yep. Looks good.
Excellent. And I just have to move people so I can see my own screen. Well, thank you so much for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to this group today. I've been spending the last 6 months researching and reading and working with some of the new technology and startups here in Orange County, California. Orange County is between LA and San Diego. And unlike we were talking earlier about snow, we're just finishing up our fire season and moving into mudslide season. In the last 6 months, part of what I've been really thinking a lot about are two questions. I'm very intrigued by: why does data management have the same challenges of adoption amid the acceleration of digital transformation? Why is it so hard, and why is it taking so long? And what are some of the steps that we as data management individuals can do to actually have data management better adopted? So to start, I want to define a couple of terms. Data management comprises all of the disciplines related to managing data as a valuable resource. That's according to Wikipedia. I really think of DAMA wheel with data governance in the middle and all the different slices of data management. Now, digital transformation is more about the process of using digital technologies to create new or modify existing business processes, culture, and customer experiences to meet the changes of business and marketing and market requirements. So digital transformation is much more about the end state and the business. Data management is more about the capabilities that need to be put into place. Now, as I go through the talk, if there are any questions in terms of the terminology that I'm using, please reach out. We can, Deborah can ask me and we can refine. And I also want to note that the sources that I'm using throughout this presentation, both books and references, are on the last page of the deck, so that you can do further understanding. So what's been going on for 50 years? I started thinking about what was going on. My own background, I've been in the business 30 plus years. I'm originally from upstate New York, where the headquarters or huge footprint of General Electric. Spent, as Deborah had said, went to Syracuse University, spent many years at Fidelity Investments in data management, helping to build various systems, relocated out to Southern California in the last couple of years, have been doing a lot of work with smaller organizations as a data strategist. Now, what's been going on in the last 50 years of data management? I thought it was interesting when I was putting this presentation together that SpaceX NASA mission just landed 4 astronauts on the space station last month. And if we go all the way back to the first IBM 7090, which really helped NASA with the Mercury and Gemini space programs in 1959, where the first computer actually helped figure out how to bring our astronauts out and bring them home. And in this time frame, there have been so many amazing changes that many people on the phone have probably been part of, starting in the 60s with Bachman, moving along with, in 71, with the database task group in Codicil, Edgar Codd at IBM, Stonebreaker and Ingress, 74 with IBM creating the SQL as an initial standard, Larry Ellison using the Codd paper in the beginning of Oracle. And then we got lots and lots of faster processing and speeds and more unstructured data. So then you end up with NoSQL, a better speed over flexibility and relational. Document stores with MongoDB, object-oriented with Object Store. And it just continues. Column stores with Cassandra and Hybase and Cloudera. And all the way into graphic databases with Neo4j and Graph Database. So what's also interesting is the first CDO really started in 2008 at Citibank, where there started to be more of a recognition in terms of data management. 2014, Wall Street Journal started actually a big data regular column. So it's coming into the mainstream. And then you have the SMACIT, the whole set of powerful, readily accessible digital technologies. And right behind it, biometrics, robotics, AI, blockchain, 3D printing. So basically, nearly every industry has been changed by this digital transformation. And the disruption is happening faster and faster. And so as it's happening faster and faster, and as we're getting newer technologies like AI and blockchain that are really reliant on top of the data management facility that an organization has, what is it that are some of the data management issues? And I recently answered, a friend had sent me a note on LinkedIn, and he had posted something that stated, with data science and data literacy and the data storytelling, where is the voice of data management? I don't hear it. And these are kind of my truths. This is what I was thinking about. Maybe some of the challenges is that data management just is not sexy, which is in part why it lacks business focus and funding. Data management is not core to the business. It really isn't being necessarily led by the business. Data focused activities are scattered all across the organization. It lacks alignment. Data strategy is sub-optimized if it exists. So the data strategy is more around separate projects that aren't necessarily integrated within different fiefdoms. And that the data strategy is not aligned with the business strategy. If there is a business strategy, it's disconnected from the assets and the data assets that actually help drive it. So so what really are the big questions? Why does data management have the same challenges of adoption amid acceleration of the digital transformation? So if we have all this new digital capabilities, why is it still going so slowly? And then what are the steps that we in the data management community can do in order to help move it forward, continue this change? Digital transformation, when I think about it, is really three big things. It's ubiquitous data, which basically says all data is available everywhere. It's unlimited connectivity, which means you can have an immediate access to any data that's there, and unlimited processing power. You can expect to be able to afford and crunch all the data that you need to. And that's where they talk about removing friction from an organization so that you have complete access to all data at all time to do anything that you want to. So a way to think about it, I actually attended a lecture at MIT maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It was a one-day chief data officer program. And Professor Jeannie W. Ross spoke, and she's out of the MIT Sloan Center for the Information Systems Research. And she really broke it down into two different ideas. An organization that's going through transformation, digital transformation, has to do two things. First, they have to digitize, and then they need to become or will become digital. When you think about digitizing, it's really around the ability to transform your backbone of the data that you have within your organization and to really control it and to have full access to the data and drive both the governance, the literacy, the storytelling into the organization. And then digital is really about, once that's done, taking portions of the organization and coming up with new customer approaches, new ways of providing value to a customer that's driven by all of this data that's available everywhere.
Question.
So sure.
Yeah. So with those two definitions, is digitized the back office and digital is the front office?
No, digitize is really the entire organization. So when I think about front office and back office, I think about it from an investment management perspective. The back office is where you price the funds and you do all the operational things within the organization. With Digitize, it's really the whole company at all layers of the organization have access to the data that's required to do their work.
But it's a heavy lifting part.
It's the operational heavy lifting, right. But it's all the way, it's from the operation side all the way into your analytics and your data science. So in my mind, it's both, it's end to end.
Thank you.
So a good example is to take Amazon, right? Amazon's probably, although they've been around a while, they do have some legacy systems. They're just amazing at being able and being digital. And so if you think about Digitized, that's as they were coming out and selling books and disrupting that area and having complete control over their data, et cetera. Then they were able to move from being digitized into digital with coming out with all sorts of new business lines rapidly. A good example, which was the day before we were going to meet 2 weeks ago, Amazon jumped into the pharmacy business. And there have been indications that they were going to be doing this, but coming out of the pandemic with people so dependent now on Prime, it actually sent, and you can see it on the screen, it sent the competitive companies, their stock falling, right? GoodRx went down 22%, Rite Aid, Walgreens, CVS. Now, I checked today, actually, some of them have come back in terms of what those numbers are, but you can see the entrant and the power of the data and the flexibility of meeting new customer demands or customer opportunities when you don't have friction and you can enter a marketplace. This type of digital organizations can decimate competitors. So if we take a look and kind of compare, and Deborah, this will go back to kind of what you're talking about. If you compare and contrast, so on a digitized versus digital, the Digitized is really focusing internally.
Sorry to cut in for a second, Barbara. I just have a question about the previous slide.
Sure.
You were talking about how Amazon, because they've got such a good digital aspect to them, can cut in. And I'm just curious, what's the aspect to is it Amazon's ability to do great digital thing, or is it also possibly the fact that Amazon is a multi-billion-dollar company that just has tons of money to throw around? Because would a smaller company be able to intercut as well as Amazon does in this situation is kind of what I'm trying to think.
Yeah, and there are smaller examples. So a good example of a company that's done a good job of digital is a company like Lego. So there are companies that are of a smaller scale. I think Amazon's scale is such. A lot of the literature suggests that any organization from a management perspective had better be very careful about other entrants in that have that access to the full set of data and the flexibility. So there are organizations where pieces of them, and we're going to go through this a little bit, where pieces of them are digitized and you have legacy that isn't. So you're going to have some organizations that are a hybrid. I think it's difficult to keep up with some of these other organizations. Another one, part of the challenge is to try and get to scale. And I think depending on the business you're in, scale looks different. What's scary about Amazon is that they just have so much data and the capability, and it's more around the culture. Part of the challenge is it's really 10% technical and 90% about how the business is being run and how they think about their data and how they've driven it into the culture.
Well, very interesting. Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Yeah, no problem. So on the one hand, you focus internally versus focusing externally, right? When you're focusing externally, you're looking for new customer value streams. A good example would be a company that is selling some of the Nike or some of the top athletic companies who are now embedding technology within their clothing that is then providing information about the customer to be able to better serve that customer. So there's all different kinds of models, but it's really starting to focus externally. Another point is that you optimize existing value. So by digitizing now, companies have been digitizing since the 70s, since we were implementing PeopleSoft or various other ERP systems, right? That's an example of optimizing. The difference is instead of doing it in silos, organizations are trying to understand what their digital platform needs to be in support of their business strategy. And it's that end-to-end platform that gives you the power of not only running your operations, but giving the democratization of data by giving people the right data to do the job when they need to have the information. And to do that, you have to think differently about how you're digitizing your end-to-end company, at least the core pieces of it. Digital, again, we were talking about trying to finding that new customer value. It's, I like these two words, just to think about it, operational backbone. They talk about data fabric now, which is a way of defining end-to-end set of data, right? So that would be an example of being part of an operational backbone. A glossary or a lot of the governance in terms of quality work that gets done, that's inherent in an operational backbone. So when I think about the DAMA wheel, and I think about those different capabilities that organizations have been trying to knit together over time, it's really addressing it at more of a business holistic perspective and driving the change into the culture. And then digital platform is, as we had said before, it really is a flexible set of components. You start to move into componentizing things and information so that you can rebundle it in order to sell and enter different kinds of industries.
Question.
Sure.
So it's the digital part is really using the data, and the digitized part is getting our ducks in a row in terms of integrating and making all the data available. Since, on the data management digitized place, one of the major drivers is data quality. Mm-hmm. Isn't it not transparent to the digital side whether they have good quality data or not, and they just assume they do. So I'm wondering where the money comes from to really expose the value of putting money on the digitized part.
Well, I think that and my premise here all along is that it really comes from the board and it comes from the business down. And that's the biggest piece that's been missing, is that I believe there's been an abdication of the ownership of IT and the business strategy not aligning with the technology strategy. If you look at digital businesses, data is at its core. Right? It's just at its core. When you interview with Google, they ask you all sorts of questions in terms of your data literacy, et cetera, right? When you're in a digital organization, you're hiring people for different reasons and having a different expectation of how they do their job using data. So there is a technical aspect to this, and there's the capabilities. I think the assumption is once you're in digital that the core business inherits all the stuff that you've done in terms of digitizing. You're just doing it so well. You can now go after different customer value, different product lines, different companies, and still maintain that operational backbone.
Great, thanks.
So it's just, if that makes sense. And then the last one, there's a consultant, John Ladley, that I stole this from, where I heard him talk about data as a lubricant when you're digitizing, which is basically making all the processes work. And then once you're digital, it becomes gasoline, right? It's something that if I have 3 different new business lines, I should be learning about my customer from all 3 and being able to leverage that across the organization if that's in alignment with the business organizational structure and strategy. So again, it's just driving data to the core of the organization. So if we think about what are some of the challenges, and I think Deborah and Nick, you brought these up. There's an excellent book, if you haven't seen it, called Winning with Data by Thomas Tungs and Frank Bean. It was out a few years ago. And I just love the language. We talk about how we can describe and sell data programs. I just really like these. The first one is data breadlines. And really data breadlines are when employees who are data poor, at the end of the day, They had 50 questions that they needed to get answered, but they couldn't get any data. Their data people were busy serving other individuals, and therefore they kind of give up, or they just stand in line waiting for the next day. The obscurity in terms of employees are just baffled at the different places to go. So if you do talk to your data group, the data group can say, oh, well, you could go over here or here or here. Those are the ones we know. Why don't you call Sally? And it's the obscurity of knowing the places to go. And then fragmentation, because I'm smart enough to know that if I can get my own data and just hang on to it and keep it somewhat clean, then I can get my business work done. And that ends up resulting in brawls, which are individuals going and trying to make business decisions, but they're sourcing their data from different places and the numbers don't tie out. So you can't actually get to a decent business decision. So, and I think that's where many organizations are. It's optimized in certain areas, but not necessarily across the organization. So what are the opportunities? The opportunities are really around data culture. And data culture is a big thing. It really is about how do people make decisions. The book had a good example of a marketing team that was going to get together to talk about using, I think it was like using a bicycle for a PR project. And one of the women went back and actually looked at the numbers to see the number of customers that cared about bicycles. And it was so small, it didn't make sense to meet. So she sent out a note and she canceled the meeting. And you didn't waste 18 people's time for an hour to decide something that didn't make any sense. So again, it's really a data culture. If you work for Google or some of the larger digital companies, there are teams that assist onboarding of people. Like, here are the 50 data sets you have access to, and here's how to think about it. Here's how we do our storytelling. And it's really that those teams are the ones that are working across the organization to help build out the fabric to make sure that people have the data they need in order to do their job. And that's a very different view than other companies that have like a couple of report people or a couple of analytics and another data scientist. It isn't necessarily actually attached to improving people's use of data in part of their job. And that's really the data team. Honesty is around, it's a cultural change, right? If everybody has the same data, then you can have very honest conversations about what we do and don't want to do, because you're not brawling. You actually have the data, but you need to be able to use data and have those decisions. And I'd mentioned a few times the data fabric, that's really around the ability to have access to the information. And so what do you get? If the entire company can speak the same language and decide based on the same facts, they're going to outperform. And we're seeing that with these major corporations. They're just outperforming other organizations, because the essence of this is removing friction. You're removing all of that friction so you can really focus, execute, and move forward. So what does this mean? So why does data management have the challenges of adoption amid acceleration? We know we're accelerating. We know we have all this opportunity, but what's holding us back? And here are a few things I've thought about. The majority of businesses are really in the digital phase. So most organizations haven't transferred over. From Mrs. Ross's latest book, which is also in the back, a few of the examples that have to look at would be Boney Mellon, DBS Bank, Lego, Philips, Schneider Electric, and USAA. And USAA is the Texas military bank that, we all see they're going into all sorts of markets. And a couple of others are companies like Warby Parker. And these are actually Warby glasses. My red glasses are Warby. ThredUp, which is the largest thrift shop in the world that's online. Venmo and Looker are a couple of other examples of those who have made it past the digitized phase, but the majority of companies are still actively working there. So this, and I alluded to this earlier, I truly believe it's business leadership has not yet created full alignment. So the business strategy about what we're going, the operational models of the business, are we decentralized? Are we centralized? Are we a hybrid? How do we think about the different businesses? What are those end-to-end digital platforms that provide that set of information plus the culture? And it's really that full end-to-end that's necessary in order to make this hop. So data management's reactive. We still, in many organizations, think about data management as a cost and not an asset. I know I've spent a lot of time in architecture and IT teams where, and working on the digital marketing side, it really comes down to what are our costing models, right? How do we think about funding projects? If you have a good problem, a data quality problem between two organizations, but there's no way to actually get it funded for another 6 months until you free up money through your funding cycle, then you're never going to really treat it as an asset. It's really just a cost. So again, it's around how we think about the value of the data. Data is part of the technical process and not owned by the business. One idea from Professor Ross is that it isn't really around business architecture. When you talk about business architecture, that's usually owned by IT. When we talk about this digital transformation, it's really about the business owning what the business is and does. So it's more of a business framework versus business architecture. So again, that's a shift. The CTO role, and there's an interesting article included in the end. The CTO role is really around the fact that it's a whole bunch of roles, and it can be chief data officer in analytics, data entrepreneur, data developer, data defender, a data architect, a data governor, a data ethicist. There's like all those jobs are all fragmented and emerging. So it's been recognized and we're working on it, but we're still slow in that we're still trying to get our hands around it organizationally. Only 40% have primary data responsibility. So again, that goes back to the fragmentation. And less than 25% of companies have no one responsible for the data. So they haven't yet recognized that this change that we need to go over. And they're short tenures. Most of them are averaging 2 years at this point in terms of individuals that are in those roles.
What do you think about the legacy we have of the title CIO, Chief Information Officer, where of course they're supposed to have that responsibility of information and data just because of their title, and understanding or not understanding whether that role can actually take over for data instead of the CTO role.
Well, it's interesting. There was a study that was just done by, what's his name? By Randy Bean with New Vantage Partners. I included the link to it at the end. And they go after it's the 8th year they've done it, and they go after the blue chip Fortune 1000 companies. And some of the feedback that they got on that is that organizations are really rethinking where the roles fit. And so with the CIO and CTO in emerging organizations, they're reporting to like a chief operating officer. So it's less around it's less about the data reporting into the CIO and more around co-organization. Citizens Bank is an example of that's how they're being organized.
Yeah, and I've heard as well that there's no patience at the board level for more C-level officers. I mean, there's just no more room for any more of them. So being a peer C-level or, stacking them somehow in larger organizations, I can see that.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the biggest struggling areas that the organization has, right? If you assume, although most of the focus is on technology, especially within the CIO's area, it's more around 90% is business, process, and people. And it's really 10% in terms of the how. I think the how you do it is becoming a commodity. And it's really more around how do you think about it. I had a consulting engagement last year doing digital marketing, and we did an evaluation of some of the companies that had radically improved their capabilities in terms of digital. And we looked at all the different digital marketing tools that they had. And the organization I was in had the exact same tools. They were just organized and thinking about the problem differently. So I am of the opinion that it really does get down to the people. And I think anything we can do, and that's part of the recommendations, anything we can do to help that conversation and to drive the data and the ownership onto the business side, the better. And I think it's going to be a flux for a while, because it's a sign that the organizations still don't know how to deal with data, which is water, which flows through everything.
Thank you.
So then the companies are shifting to a data-centric view. So this is where I think we have a great opportunity. I think that the fact that they have to transfer, or the fact that people are going through digital transformation, the fact that it drives data to the center of the organization is a huge opportunity for data management professionals to continue to help drive and be in the game. And so if you take a look at the original data opportunities that I had put down, data management is sexy. Well, it's probably never going to be sexy. It hopefully will become more critical, or viewed as being critical. Data management is a core capability as you drive it in for this transformation. Data-focused activities are aligned across the organization, that the strategy is optimized, and that it's aligned with the business strategy. And I think just depending, you go through multiple iterations of development and capability building, and depending on where you are, you're just trying to get to that next level in terms of the overall capability of the organization. I think there's going to continue to be huge investments made, especially with driving with AI and some of the other capabilities. And it is a real opportunity for data management. So what steps can you take? And I try to be pretty practical that we can take as a group of individuals. And the first thing I thought of was really around know your business digital phase. So where are we? And it could be an organization can have multiple, I worked at Fidelity Investments, and they had 401k business and brokerage and tomato plants. They had so many different kinds of businesses. There is a feeling of overall how the organization is being run and managed, and then within your area. But I think these are some questions to ask. Is the business strategy, is there really a business owner? Is there a data strategy, and is there an owner? How about IT? Are they actively aligning across? What's the funding? How does the funding work? Is it even possible to get funding for the things that you think need to happen? Operational business metrics, to really understand what the business is in and what the metrics are. What about the language of the company, of how they talk to each other in terms of the organization? Data culture and data teams. We talked earlier about the data teams that help individuals within the organization use data to improve both their process and getting their own jobs done. Are they more focused on an operational backbone, or have they crossed over and they're more doing digital platform type focused work? And again, data fabric, is the set of data available across the organization, or are we even thinking about that yet from an organization standpoint? So
in terms of the funding model and changing the funding model, I'm sorry, if you could go back up one.
Oh, no, that's cool.
Is it possible or even useful to put an ROI into data management projects if they're just, part of the digitizing phase, to show the value that they're actually bringing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like it is digital, and therefore the more you measure and the more you can show what you've measured, the more you can look back. I think some when you are starting in the digitized world, there are certain, this is just my experience, there are certain fundamentals that you have to have in place to get started. And so it kind of depends on where you are on that curve. I think you get to a certain level where you can then start to really measure, but without the other pieces, there's just there's a ground zero you need to get to. Maybe it's ground one.
Sure. Maybe you're not even aware that you could put in an ROI for a data management project, which is just going to facilitate two things between, say, a data lake and a data warehouse. You wouldn't think of an ROI on that, would you? Because it's not, it doesn't show up until the front end.
Although I think that there are ways that I've seen where if you've got a full project portfolio, right, that's void of data. We did this at Capital Group, a full void. You can start to look to say, okay, out of that whole suite of projects, which ones from a governing perspective are going after which sets of assets, and starting to shine a light on the fact that this data is flowing and that we aren't completely separate components, right? That's part of the challenge, because I think data people, when you're in the middle, you see the fact that this stuff is connected. Or if you're an operations manager and you get woken up every night fixing fidelity.com, I can tell you which engines we fixed because I didn't want to get woken up again.
Right. So you can look at it from a project point of view, or even as installed, and that's shown value on you're using it on the front end, and then walk back into those components and the value that they bring to that. That's really interesting.
And I've also done it in terms of support. Sometimes you can get the funding to shine a light to say, I worked on a publishing system and it was completely decentralized. So they were out in all different places. Well, they were getting data issues, but there was no way they knew that the data issues were actually coming from the same source in operations, because it filtered through, again, gets back to fragmentation. It's sifted through so many different places that you had to kind of figure that out. So doing things within business architecture, and why I say that is if you're working on like a small analytics piece, but you can show how that analytics piece actually fits with the rest of the business process and have that conversation with the business, you continue to educate. So again, it depends on where you are. And that's really the next piece here is, this is kind of my model in my own mind in terms of a data management digital framework. So if you have, how well are you transformed digitally versus how sophisticated are you within your data management? And I think within each one of these blocks, you've got series of a capability staircase that you're going up as you're learning. So if you know that you really aren't doing very much digital, I worked last year for a bakery, very, very large bakery. And they were just they had ERP, they had a few things, but you pretty much put them in more pre-digital, right? In terms of where they were going. Other organizations have very specific projects, and those digitizing projects or pilots, sometimes it's data governance and it's quality and it's other kinds of things that they're trying to automate. Other ones, it's really some of the backbone and the platform work that they're doing. Or maybe they're using bots or bringing in AI or something. But again, they're usually one-off and they're learning. And part of the recommendation is, in general, with all this stuff, everything at the end of that timeline I presented is to jump in the lake and get as much experience as you can, because you're not going to get it right to start. And if you delay, your competitors are going to eat you alive. So jump in and figure it out, but have a strategy, tie your business strategy into the other components. So as you're learning, you're moving forward. I thought it was interesting, when you're pre-digital, you can go either way or go up towards digitizing and creating that operational backbone. And then as you move forward, the rare cases where there are organizations that are digital native, right? They started without the legacy. They're completely in the cloud. They never had any legacy. But you can even be digital native and not have an operational backbone because you never thought about it and you didn't put data as part of the core of the business. So this is a way to kind of think about where you are within the organization. And then if there were a set of like things to think about, how can we as data management professionals help drive this adoption? And so the first one is really find influencers in the business, the data, and the IT leaders.
So here's a question. So, sure. And maybe it talks to a point further down in the slide. Forgive me if it does. But you talked earlier about, the business strategy, the data strategy, the IT strategy, and getting them all aligned. Each of them may have owners, but who owns the integration and alignment between them? I mean, maybe that's part of the puzzle that's missing here too. You'll have leaders in each of those, but no one to actually care about the alignment the way it should be.
I think it goes back with many companies in terms of the disconnect from the business. I believe it should be up to the board, and that might sound crazy, but I think, and you're starting to see some of it with cybersecurity. You're starting to see data management, more security, but other experts getting brought into boards to talk about it because of the challenges with competitors in terms of the long-term use of the business. I think that architecture can help, but I think the business has to own its data and how it uses information to run the business. And I do think that's the big aha, at least it has been for me, is that there are influencers in the business. And it could be, maybe you can only influence the division you're in or the area that you're in, right? Like some of these are very top down. If you talk about success of those organizations that are going to make this leap from digitized to digital, it's going to get driven out of the business and the other pieces will get aligned. Now, the next question is, how do you get the alignment? I think you can get the alignment through business architecture by clearly identifying how the business runs, what are the processes that are there, and what's the data that supports the processes. I think we have frameworks and approaches that can be applied to this. Again, it's less technical and more around how it organizes a business to be able to move it forward.
Thank you.
So the next one is know your company, know the company's business strategy and the numbers. And I'd have to say that the individuals in data management that have the highest level of credibility, or those governance programs that have really, actually been super successful, it's because they drove them, totally understood where the business was going and the operational numbers that were necessary and focused on what was important. So again, it's less about the DEMA wheel and the level of capability within each one of those areas, and more around making sure it's super tied to the business. If the business isn't driving, then we have to somehow come back and meet the business.
So with the business strategy and numbers, you mean numbers meaning we will get X percentage more customers in 2 years? Is that kind of the numbers that we're trying to align to?
Yeah, I would say it is the operational numbers that helps the business manage itself to meet its goals.
Thank you.
So then the next one is to track the data strategy of competitors and to stay sharp. And why I say that is I think sometimes we stay way too focused internally, and a lot of what's going on in this transformation, there are leapfrogging going on in terms of the ability and what other organizations are doing, and looking internally in terms of what you can take advantage of and where you need to be. I think it also, I've seen, gives a lot of support internally. If you can shine a light and show your competitors are so much further ahead than where you are, as you're justifying something, it adds a piece of fear in the organization in terms of why we need to focus on it. So again, the suggestion is just don't stay insular, look outside and see how you can bring that forward. The next one is to align the business, the data, and the IT, so that no matter where you are in any one of the quadrants, as you're working on projects, see and try and paint that picture of where the pieces come together, especially if the organization doesn't see it yet. And really advocate for business leadership. So if you're working on a program and you really don't have business leadership in terms of what you're trying to do, and you're creating the operating model for the program or participating, broaden that. And again, that's really about understanding the organization really well. Oftentimes I'll do what I call a war plan, which is literally a decomposition of the organizational chart to determine who's who, where are they, what are they responsible for, and are there overlaps, so that you really understand not just your own little area, but broader. So if you're working in governance, really understand what they're doing in terms of data security and some of these other functions that might not fall within your organization, but from a data perspective are really in alignment. Because what you may find is a whole lot of other support in other areas to move your piece forward. And that brings us to bringing data people together to learn and to create solutions. I've been in shops where we literally brought the data warehouse integration, all the managers that had slices who normally wouldn't necessarily get together except on a specific project, and started using that as like community organizing. It was like data community organizing, where we would bring the projects in and help them see, are they getting their data from the right sources? Are they thinking about integration the way in the next generation that the integration leadership is thinking about? And so again, that's bringing data and people together to come up with better solutions to understand how you can affect this change. And the last one is really refining language that resonates. In a recent assignment I had, it was very interesting where in terms of digital marketing, all the different organizations couldn't really talk about customer 360 or some of the other things that were going on in the organization. They didn't really have language to talk to each other. And through the program, we kept kind of a one-pager, almost like a one-pager describing what we were trying to do. And it was very interesting in hindsight, looking back at the project, because we probably generated one maybe every 3 weeks or so. And to see how the language changed and how the organization kind of gained harmony over an agreement in terms of what they were trying to do, because they ended up having shared language. So we talk about language as data management people in terms of defining attributes and sources and all that other stuff. I think that there is also a language of data and its use and how it ties to the business that we can help the organization with as well. And the more the organization agrees on what that language is, the higher their data literacy is, the better they'll be using their data. So those are a few.
Sorry, so I do have a question about this. How does this work in with creating stories around your data from the perspective of the listener? In other words, with him, what's in it for me? Is that a kind of a subset of the marketing page and the language?
Well, actually,
or is that a learning mechanism for the marketing page about how the various organizations, speak about data?
So what we did was we identified what is the problem, how does it manifest, what is the scope of it, what do we want it to look like, what would the target state look like. So we actually took all those different pieces, and as we were working through the program, they got refined, right? And through that process, the different parts of the organization started to see themselves, because they didn't call it that data or that wasn't their process. They had their own fragmentation. It gets back to the challenges of data that we talked about earlier with the data brawls and everything, right? In order to break that down, one way to break that down is to unify people in terms of language and the reason why we're doing things and how the language works, so that in the end state, you're like collecting people along the way so that there's a higher understanding and a better data literacy. But I think it's at a different level than what you would think about if you were just building a data glossary, right? It's more around how do you think about the various data programs.
Right.
So my last suggestion, and I came across this maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and I don't know if people are aware of this. This was a group of data professionals. I think, Deborah, I think it was like 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
And it's called the Leaders Manifesto.
They launched at a DAMA International Conference.
Right. And individuals on the call, you can go out to www.dataleaders.org and you can sign it. And some organizations, I actually watched one of the videos of I think it was the second conference where they were presenting this. And you can print this off and hang it in your office. You can bring it to meetings and talk to people. And basically what it says is data matters. It matters in terms of how we're going to live our lives. And I can tell you, being in the United States, just coming out of the last election, data matters where you get it. If people trust it, it really matters. We still don't quite have a president. And so I think that this is also kind of an agreement of data management people around an organization to say, this is really where we want to go. And this really becomes not just for the data management people, but for your business partners in terms of, if we're going to continue to be successful and we're going to be on this digital journey, we need to agree that this is where we're trying to get to.
Mm-hmm. And you can see some of, I know it's hard to read there, but you can see some of it saying that data improves the human condition. I mean, really, I think it's fundamental what we're talking about here in this data manifesto. So please, yeah, I fully agree with you, Barb. I think people should go take a look at this. And it says at the bottom, please sign up. Please sign the manifesto.
And I thought it was interesting. I heard a woman explaining how she used it within her own organization, and she printed it off. And when she had one-on-one discussions with people, she talked about at kind of on like one-on-ones with individuals, talking about not only the business, but their own life and data and why it's important and what we need to do. And I think that it's kind of an ongoing discussion, with big tech and everything else. It's a huge discussion right now. And that's why, in summary, I think data management has been stuck. I think we have the power within us to get it unstuck. And right now, with the whole digital transformation, if we're open and we really look around the organization and are creative, we can help the organization make this change and take advantage of some of the funding and change in thinking where there's new opportunities that maybe we haven't had in the past.
Well, thank you, Barb. This has been a fascinating session. I was very eager to get into this, and really the connection between business IT and data. You've really highlighted that and brought that into focus for us, and all the things that we might be able to poke at in order to improve our situations. I can see you've got your books and references there.
I would say a couple of the ones I talked about, Jeannie Ross at MIT. And so that's that IT Savvy book, was written in, I think, 2008. I think it came out in 2008. And I reread it this summer. And what was interesting about it was it hasn't changed. It's been 12 years. What they identified in 2008, it's been 12 years and we're still working on it. And I think that's kind of where my thought about why are we so stuck and what can we do about it came from. The Design for Digital just came out. It's fairly new. It's a little drier than the other one, but has a lot of really good examples in it. And I added the other two just because I gave a talk a few years ago on data governance, and my peer that I gave the talk with introduced me to this book called Reinventing Organizations. And it's a Frenchman, and he talks about different models all the way out from complete command and control, all the way out to complete agile, and the implication of organizations and their structure. And it was just a very different way of thinking about it. So for anyone that's on the call, if you're in an organization where you're having some challenges or whatever, you might find some interesting ideas in there. And Traction is a new book. I started my consulting company about 2 years ago and was working on a business plan, and a friend of mine sent me that book. It's really targeted towards smaller organizations, like individuals, and how well you run a business. What's interesting about it is it puts data at the core. And it talks about how in running a business, if you run the business and you have the set of the processes well defined and the data, and everybody has a metric, and you're managing the company, et cetera, you will be successful in terms of profitability, et cetera. And it made me think that in a little teeny tiny company, if you can do that, somehow we need to be able to replicate that at scale in these larger organizations. And it's a whole lot more difficult. So if you're working in a smaller organization, you might find Traction interesting. And I put in a bunch of different links as well, both Sloan and MIT, and a couple of other ones I found that people might find interesting in terms of some of the metrics behind this topic.
All right. Well, then, thank you. I hear from our YouTube side that people are just thanking you left, right, and center for covering, for doing this very well. And we're at the top of the hour, so I wish everybody a great afternoon out there in California, Barb, and wherever in the world our other people on the YouTube side are from. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks now. For our next presentation, we're going to be around for the 16th, and our presentation then is entitled, and apologies for switching screens on you here, Keep Business Moving Forward in a Pandemic with E-Signatures. So that's always been a problem, getting really legal signatures on materials which are digital. So please join us on December the 16th. We'll be putting out the notice of meeting for that on all our regular channels, including LinkedIn, our mailing list, and our meetup group, and hope to see you then. Have a nice time. Have a nice rest.